In this video, I'm going to talk about two things that I think we've all dealt with in the past, but hopefully we never have to deal with in actual gameplay. And that is idiotic players and terrible DMs. So let's pick on the players first. The first thing I'm going to talk about are idiotic players. And what I'm talking about are players who make really, really unwise decisions and choices. It's the kind of situation where everybody else at the table looks at them and thinks, what is wrong with you? Why would you want to do it that way? Here's an example. I had a group of players that entered a pyramid. They explored underneath, think Mesoamerica, kind of the step pyramids of the Aztecs and so forth. They explored around, they emerged at the top of the pyramid, and then as they looked down on the ground surrounding the pyramid, there were some local villagers that were being attacked by monsters. One of the players ran a cleric, and he wants to help the villagers, and the first thing he's thinking of is, how quickly can I get to them? Rather than making his way down the step pyramid, which would take a little bit of effort because these steps were pretty good sized, or going back down through the interior of the pyramid, which is not a good option, he thought, I'm just going to jump off the pyramid, take my chances, get to the bottom in one fell swoop, pun intended, and get to the villagers as quickly as I could. Well, I told him, you realize you're going to roll a d6 for every 10 feet of fall damage to get to the bottom. So this was, I think this pyramid was 80 feet tall, something like that. So there was 8d6 potential damage. He looked at his character sheet. His character had 56 hit points. So he did some math, figured out he would survive, but the odds are he wouldn't suffer that much damage. And he thought, oh, I'll just heal myself when I get to the bottom. All the other players looked at this character or this player and said, what are you thinking? That's not the way to go. We can get down there. The villagers will survive until we can get down there in a safer manner. As a DM, I gave him that proverbial, are you sure? And I did it like 2 more times. Are you really sure? Are you really want to do that? Here's the amount of damage you can potentially sustain. He just kept insisting, no, I want to jump down. I'll survive. I'll do it. Well, I think he got like 80% of the maximum potential damage. He was left with just like a 10 or 12 hit points, something like that. And he gets to the bottom. He's all banged and bruised. And by that point, the villagers, the monsters had kind of scattered and some of the villagers died and so forth. So he ended up not making any positive impact on the situation at all. And all he did was weaken the group's cleric substantially. He barely had enough healing to heal himself back up to normal. And keep in mind, this is toward the end of their adventure. So they had already depleted a lot of spells. A lot of arrows were gone. Everyone in the group had sustained hit point damage. So they were weakened to begin with anyway. That was a circumstance where it wasn't just a player saying, I want to subjectively do something that is odd or different, but has no impact. In this case, the player made a choice that had an impact, obviously not only on their own character in a big way, but it impacted the party. And this did go on to have ripple effects toward the party after that. It made me, as a DM, think this player is kind of a moron. And it fit a pattern of other situations where that particular player made really unwise choices. And as a DM, I can only say, that's not going to go well without giving things away. And as a DM, you have to be careful not to give too much away, but you still want to, you want your players to succeed. You want your players to take chances and win despite the odds. But you also don't want them to take extreme risks either, because that usually doesn't work out. This was a circumstance where the other players got so fed up with that particular player's string of choices, not just that one bad one, but a string of choices, of which that was kind of the culmination, that they eventually kicked him out of the group. Not because they didn't like him, but because he was kind of a moron. I had another player who, when the group entered a room that had a mysterious black pool in the center of it, they didn't know what that liquid was. They didn't know how deep the pool was. The pool was a complete mystery. They didn't know if it was magical, if it was toxic, if it was just dark water, whatever. For whatever reason, this one particular player decided he was going to just wade in and think that it was up to his knee. I don't know why he thought that. I didn't give any indication as a DM that that was the case. He just decided to weigh in. Now, keep in mind, I believe he played, he was a melee type and he had a lot of metal armor on. So as soon as he got up to the edge of the pool, which, the lip was about a foot high off the ground, I said, "Do you really want to go in? Are you going to step in? Are you going to reach in with your staff or something like that to see how deep it is?" He says, "No, I'm just going to jump in." I said, "Are you going to jump in head first or feet first?" He said, "I'm going to jump in feet first." Okay, whatever. He leaps in, and this pool happened to be 30 feet deep, and he's wearing full metal armor. So, blub, 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 he goes straight to the bottom and starts to drown. The group didn't have any rope, so they had to go through extraordinary effort to save their drowning comrade by linking arms and having several of them be underwater in this icky black, it was basically slime from a demon, so it was really foul. They had to let several of their members link arms and lower themselves down under this water and grab a hold of him using all kinds of crazy dexterity and strength checks, basically to hit rolls to see if they could grasp him in the black. They couldn't see. It was very cold. Somehow, through a miracle of really, really good rolls, skill checks, they managed to grab this character by the scruff of his armor and hoist everybody back up. They barely made it. It was heroic and it was extremely memorable, but it was also a situation where that one player made a choice that had no redeeming value to it whatsoever. There was no point. He wasn't going after anything in particular. It's not like he dropped his favorite sword into the bottom of this pool or he was rescuing someone. He created a very, very dangerous situation that the odds are would have gone terribly wrong, not just for that character, but others as well. Miraculously, it worked out. But what ended up happening down the road is, like my first example, the other players decided that player had made multiple poor choices, ill-advised things, especially when the DM, me, kept saying, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And the other players kept saying, "No, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that." This player kept making bad choices for whatever reason. They had no concept of reading the room, of what are the other players advising, what is the DM advising. Because usually when the DM leans in and says, "Are you really sure you want to do that?" That's a sign that it's probably going to go wrong. Now, I let everything up to the dice to make the decisions, but I set realistic DCs, difficulty challenges, and they somehow managed to pull it off. But the players petitioned me afterward when that one player was not in the room. They all individually came to me. They didn't decide this as a group. They all individually came to me and said, "We really don't want that player in the group anymore. How can we do this?" I ended up having to ask that player offline, "I'm sorry, but you're not allowed in the group anymore because it's essentially a consensus that you don't play well with others." That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a DM because everybody liked this player, but they ruined the fun because they introduced so much danger and other things that the party ended up having to do to counteract their bad choices that it was ruining the fun. And that was not fun for me as a DM either, both at the gaming table while these events were occurring. It was such a cringe thing that I also had to dynamically adapt and adjust to what this player was doing. That it's not that it wasn't in the script. I can handle that. That's no problem. It's just that they were introducing so much danger that I constantly had to come up with, how do I handle this from a dice standpoint so that there's at least some chance of survival. I didn't just arbitrarily say, your character made a bad choice and you die. That would have been easy, but it wouldn't have been right. But anyway, this particular player ended up getting themselves kicked out of the group because of repeated idiotic, moronic, stupid behavior. That's what happens. The next situation I'm going to talk about is a dungeon master who was just terrible. And I think this is probably the case more often where you have a dungeon master who is either ill-prepared or they insist that everything be their way. They become antagonistic to players when the DM's plans don't go the way they wanted. I've actually kind of been there a little bit. I've talked in some of my other videos about how I wanted the campaign and the adventure to go in a particular direction. The players made a choice that was a significant deviation from that plan, and I didn't handle it well. I've learned from that mistake, and there is some redemption there, but there's a lot of DMs that just can't handle that. So the example I'm going to talk about is a DM that kind of embodies all of those situations. This was someone who had been a player in our group. I was the DM with a co-DM, and we would trade places every 2 or 3 months to give each other a break. Well, this one guy, we're going to call him Dave. He decided, he wanted to try being a DM as well. He insisted that he had been a DM when he had been in the military 2 decades before, and that he was a great DM and so forth. Well, we came to find out that wasn't true. So we decided we were going to let him run a game, a short adventure that he wrote. Probably he estimated would take 3 sessions. So the first night, everything's going okay, but as a player, we started to notice that this DM's adventure was very linear. And as we were mapping this out, we realized it's a room with a corridor with a room with a corridor, and that's how it went for like the first 5 rooms. And everything inside those rooms was like a trope level set piece. You walk into this room and there's 6 orcs and a treasure chest in the corner. Okay. You walk into the next room and it was something very similar. It was like he had no imagination or no creativity whatsoever. And then we come into this room that had a puzzle. We figured out as players a way to solve the puzzle in a way that was not the way he thought we were going to solve it. And that's cool. It's really cool as a DM when your players find a solution that you didn't think of. In fact, there's a lot of times where, as a DM, I'll create a puzzle without knowing what the solution is. I just leave it up to the players to figure it out. And they always do. They always do. In this case, we found a solution that wasn't the way he would have solved the problem. And he got personally upset about it. He got real butthurt. And when, at the end of that particular session, as he's getting very, very angry with us, we made it past that the puzzle room into the next one, and he threw at us this huge dragon that was way overpowered for the adventure. It was way overpowered for the party. Many of us were getting wiped out. It was almost a TPK before us players said, "Wait a minute, Dave. Why did you throw this huge dragon at us? This doesn't make any sense. Did we miss something?" He made a comment along the lines of, "I did it because you deserve it." And we're like, "What? Why? How do we as players deserve to have this TPK level dragon thrown at us?" And he said, "Because you didn't solve that puzzle the way I wanted you to solve it." And at this level, we're thinking, okay, this was a huge mistake. How long before the session ends? We just want to get this over with and then move on and get back to me and the other DM taking over. And then he admitted that he did something that just kind of blew us away, and it explained a few things. He took a series of set pieces from a video game, and that's what we were playing. We were playing the plot and the scenes of a video game from like the 90s. He admitted that he added no creativity to it whatsoever. He didn't just use it as inspiration. He literally took it as a script. And in that video game, you had to solve the puzzle in a very particular way. He said the only thing that he improvised was that dragon at the end. In fact, there wasn't even supposed to be that room at the end. He threw that dragon in there out of revenge and out of spite. And that was a circumstance where when a DM doesn't have any creativity or they mirror something else, that's okay. You can get away with that, especially if the players don't pick up on it or if it translates well. But when you get angry with your players for succeeding and then you get vengeful, that's when a DM kind of jumps the shark and becomes one of those kind of dungeon masters where you really don't even want them to still be in the same room. You don't even want them. I mean, we didn't even really want him to go back to being a player because that was his normal role. However, I will say, to his credit, After the session was over, as we were all getting done and we were leaving, he came up to me, who I was the DM prior to that particular point. He came up to me and he said, "That was a lot harder than I thought it would be." And I said, "I thought you were a DM in the military, 20 years ago." He says, "Yeah, I kind of fibbed about that. I was a player. We had a good DM, but he admitted that he kind of lied about that." And then he admitted that he didn't realize just how difficult it is to be a DM, and that handling the situation of trying to figure out what the players can experience versus what the players should experience in his mind. In his mind, he thought that he had to map everything out and that everything had to be pre-planned and that the players were funneled in a very expertly choreographed way. That's what he thought, which was, he was basing it on a video game. That's not how being a DM goes. You create opportunities, but you don't necessarily create outcomes. And then you let your players explore it, and whatever happens, happens. And then you deal with it. He didn't realize that. And he did admit that he reacted in a very emotional way. He was actually kind of surprised with how angry he became at us as players. And he wasn't prepared for it. So he very humbly, at our next session, when he was back to being a player, he very humbly apologized to everyone for a terrible session, was the word he used. And he said, "I'll not be a DM again." And we all tried very hard not to applaud that choice. But that happens. Now, in that particular case, Dave exhibited almost every attribute of what I would call a bad DM in one particular session. It was like a master class of what not to do. Fortunately, we had enough of a rapport between all of us that we were able to say, okay, it was just a mistake. We'll remember it, but we're all glad that we'll never have to do that again. And he was quite happy to go back to being a player. And he was a decent player. He played a barbarian, did a really good job at it. He just couldn't DM to save his life. This video is about bad experiences so that we can learn from them and hopefully not repeat them ourselves. It's also kind of a little bit of a lesson on when these kinds of situations happen. And they absolutely can. You can have bad players, you can have bad DMs, and everybody can have a bad night. It's also kind of a situation of how do you deal with that? When you have bad players, what do you do? When you have a bad DM, what do you do? My advice from my own experience is, first of all, address it outside of the game. Wait until everybody's gone. Talk to the person one-on-one. First is listen first. Don't just come right at them and accuse them or make bold statements. Ask them questions, It seemed like you were struggling, What was, why were you frustrated? You got angry at that one point. Why was that? Why do you make these choices? Are you looking for a particular kind of fun? Is it because you feel like there's no consequences? Just ask some questions first. Let the person be heard. Then my advice is, when you have some specific frustrations, be specific about why you are frustrated. Talk about the behavior, the choices, not necessarily the person. They might be having a great time and they may be completely clueless that they're causing such havoc. So remember that, honey catches more flies than vinegar, but it's also a good idea to be honest. And I think a lot of people will respect that. Even if they don't like it, they'll respect it. Now, when you present someone this situation and you talk with them and they react in a very negative way, or it's not a constructive situation, as long as you approached it in somewhat of a respectful and mature manner and they still give you an intensely negative reaction, that kind of answers the question for you in most situations. That tells you that that player probably just isn't for your group, or that DM really shouldn't be a DM, or that DM is just not the kind of game master that your group wants. That's okay, that happens. There's all kinds of situations where someone just doesn't fit with that particular group. There might be another group where that's totally fine. That player that makes those gonzo choices, they might have a blast with another group of players who love to make gonzo choices. And they may have a DM that supports that and facilitates it. You do you. And if that's what you like, go for it. That's what's great about D&D, is it's very flexible. D&D is also highly subjective. What makes a good time, what defines a good time, is entirely up to you personally, and it's entirely up to your group. And that chemistry that you have as a group is determined by all the individuals and what you all collectively want. It's pretty rare, actually, I think, for everyone to have a group where everyone gels, everyone's on the same page, and everybody is aligned in what they want and what they enjoy. That does happen, but it can take a while. So don't feel bad if it doesn't happen on your first try or in your first group. Keep at it. And if that group is just not working out, look for another one. If you're a player and the other players or the DM are constantly telling you, are you really sure you want to do that? Or please don't do that. Listen, there may be functional reasons for why these people are frustrated. It's not just personal. They're not necessarily attacking you. They're questioning your decisions. It's still your choice, but other people don't have to like it. It's not other players' responsibility or obligation to accept your choices or your play style. And if this keeps happening to you, you might want to pay a little attention to that and recognize that. If you're a DM and your players keep expressing frustration, or the one of the biggest tells of all that you might not be a good DM is when your players just fail to show up. They keep ghosting you. You have such a terrible time finding players who want to stick around and stay in the group. That's a good sign that you're not providing the opportunity for them to have fun in a way that they enjoy. You might have a style that works, but for other players. So again, be willing to accept feedback, do some self-reflection, see if that lines up with how you actually want to run the game. If you are convinced that you have a good way of doing it and those players just don't like it, then find some other players. If you keep running into that, though, you may want to face the possibility that DMing just isn't for you. Ultimately, give it all a try, do what you can to have fun, listen, and pay attention to how things go. Usually when things are going right, it's really obvious. When things are going wrong, you may be getting subtle hints from the situation, from the players, from the DM. But if that continues, listen to that as well. In the end, I do hope you have fun, stay cool, and keep your dice rolling.